Recently, I played through Halo 3 with Heaven, Xaniri, and Zap, and these are our real thoughts after finishing the game.
I will start off by saying, while Halo 3 is not my favorite game, I think it has aged the least of the Halos. I would even include Reach with that, because I think Reach's sandbox is a lot less fun than 3, and 3 is also a very colorful game, so despite everyone's models being really bad, bases are terrible in Halo 3. The gameplay and the gunplay is a lot of fun, and it's very colorful, and so it feels good to play through.
Yeah, I think that out of all of them, besides Halo 2 Anniversary, I think it obviously looks the crispest, and it's definitely got the best play feel to it. I definitely think that it is showing its age a little bit, but it's really nothing to sniff at. It's still a fantastic game that you can play through over and over again and kind of have a different experience each time. If you think about the campaigns from like Call of Duty and Battlefield and stuff, it doesn't matter what weapons you take. It doesn't matter what enemies you're facing, because they're all basically copied and pasted. So you're playing, this can apply to any Halo as well, but if you're facing a gold elite, 2 jackals with shields, and a grunt with a needler, it'll play out completely differently depending on what weapon you're playing. If you're doing it with the assault rifle, or if you're doing it with the BR, or if you're doing it with grenades, without grenades, then if you were facing 2 hunters and 3 grunts, or 2 blue elites and a jackal, it's so varied that I don't want to say that replayability is endless, because obviously eventually you're going to see everything, but it can be so different each time that it feels refreshing.
And just the ability with 4-player co-op, because this was the first one to have full 4-player co-op. It's so much fun to have 2 extra friends in there, because it gets more chaotic.
Going back to what Zan said about the replayability, when I was playing through with everybody here, I was doing it completely differently than if it were on my own, simply because I didn't have to worry so much about it, so I would just use different weapons, and I was basically being more silly with it, I guess, and that's definitely a completely different way of playing it. It's almost a different game.
Yeah, you do get to use a bit more of the sandbox when you're playing with friends, because death is not a big deal. So it's like, oh, I'm going to pick up this weapon because it's fun, not just, I'm going to only stick with the good weapons.
Like, you're playing on Legendary with 4 people, you don't have to be like, okay, I need the plasma pistol, I need the BR.
I think Halo 3 in general, even if you're playing it on Legendary by yourself, is not that reliant on the noob combo like the previous ones are. Especially because there's things like the equipment really help with, especially like a bubble shield can help with, like, oh, I need to get behind cover. Here, I'll just make some cover for myself real quick and use that.
In Halo 2, I recall there were only 3 weapons I was really willing to use, because the others were either too difficult to figure out how to use them within the context of the situations I was in, or they're just weak. In Halo 3, I think all the weapons are pretty much more balanced out between each other, so you can pick and choose and have more variety from level to level, you know?
And especially on Heroic, where like things aren't that tough, but they're tough enough that like using a weapon, you'll be using the weapon. You're not just destroying the enemy.
Yeah, you get a lot more feedback. Like, there's definitely a better. It's like, if you're playing by yourself, go play normal. Have a somewhat challenging, but you still feel like you're the fucking Master Chief. You're a hardcore motherfucker. But if you're playing on Heroic and Legendary by yourself, you feel like just like a Marine with an overshield. You're just as vulnerable as everyone else, except you can take a few more hits. And I think Halo 3 really captured that, because in Halo 2, on Legendary, if your friend died, you restart it. And I think while that left alone is a cool challenge, if you're looking for something really, really specific, try doing Lasso Halo 2, and you're going to be doing it for hours, and you're going to be pissed off, but it is a challenge. If they brought that back for Halo 3, I think that, especially with 4-player co-op, I think it would have been a nightmare. So I think they made a good decision in terms of how they set up the multiplayer in Halo 3 and how it reacts to everything.
Yeah, not having you reset the checkpoint every time somebody dies that's such a pain in Halo 2, especially on Legend. In terms of level design, I think Halo 3 is a bit backloaded. I think Sierra 117 is a fine level. Crow's Nest is not great. Savo Highway is fun, but like once you hit the Storm, that's when the levels get pretty fun. Like the Storm is really good. Floodgates, but it's super short. The Arc is super good. Covenant's fucking awesome. Cortana, not so much. And then Halo is a great way to end the game. The big open sandboxy levels, lots of vehicles to go around. They all look really nice.
You're absolutely right. It definitely sandboxes more than I think Halo 2 did. It definitely didn't capture the Halo 1 sandbox feel, but I think that that's kind of what they were trying to do in terms of making it like a linear storytelling kind of thing.
And after playing through CE recently, I would honestly say it's almost a good thing that they didn't perfectly recapture the CE stuff, because a lot of the CE stuff didn't age super great, especially the vehicle sections and stuff like that. It didn't feel all that interesting. It was mostly just drive from point A to point B, and that was kind of it. Whereas this is like, we'll drive our vehicle from a gunfight to gunfight, and it's a lot of fun driving around the little arenas, killing everything, and then moving on. It was a lot more well-rounded in this. Also, I think this is the most colorful Halo. Halo 1 has a lot of color to it, but the lighting itself is not all that advanced. Halo 2, the original lighting is pretty flat because they weren't able to do the more advanced lighting system that they wanted originally. Anniversary looks really nice, but I think Halo 3 just has the most color that ODST, Reach, 4 don't have. Like, ODST is very dark and kind of bland looking. Reach is definitely they go for more gritty, kind of muted color tone to make it more serious, and then Halo 4 is just fucking terrible lighting.
Yeah, I mean, Halo 4 was like really the first thing that 343 really had their dirty, grubby little paws in, and I think I kind of know what they were going for, but at the same time, I just don't think that they captured Halo. I feel like Halo 3 is kind of like the Halo experience summed up to that point.
Yeah, if you're going to introduce somebody to the Halo series, I think this would be the best place to start. Well, now that I say that, the story of Halo 3 is the weakest point, and I think it's one of the weaker ones in the Halo series because it starts off from the cliffhanger of Halo 2 and then doesn't really reintroduce the characters like Halo 2 did, because between Halo 1 and Halo 2, they had decided, it was like, okay, well, Johnson's a main character now, so when he shows up in Halo 2, he's going to be in cutscenes some more. We get to introduce Miranda, we get to introduce the Arbiter, we get to introduce Lord Hood. But then for Halo 3, since it's all coming off of a cliffhanger, you just have to know these characters. And I think, Halo 3 sold like hotcakes. So, like, everybody who owned an Xbox 360 had Halo. You're probably pretty familiar with the characters, but to anyone who's not in that series, you're sort of missing out on these introductions to these characters. And if you never even played Halo 2, who is the Arbiter? Why is he important at all? Because he's sort of put into the back in Halo 3, and his arc just kind of ends abruptly during the one mission, and there's not like a whole lot of focus on the Arbiter. So if you don't know any of these characters, they don't matter, and they don't characterize them well enough, I think, in 3 most of the time. You get enough with Johnson, I think, but why is Miranda important? Who even is she? Who is this Lord Hood guy who's talking to us on the radio? Why are we fighting with these aliens on our side? And it's like, what are these monkeys? Who is Truth? They don't reestablish any of that stuff, which, to a point, like, if you played through Halo 2, you wouldn't need it, but anybody new to the series would. And so while Halo 3 is maybe mechanically the best one to introduce people into the series, the story wouldn't make much sense.
I would say Halo 3 is like the Return of the Jedi of the series. From a story perspective, it's the necessary, they need to finish everything up. They made it really dramatic, and it was a good, impressive end to everything, but because everything else had already been built upon, there was basically nowhere to go. It was just finishing things up.
Yeah, and even mechanically in art style stuff and introducing new things. Halo 1 to Halo 2 was a huge leap. Everything looked different in Halo 2. Everything was way more high poly. Like, if you even go back and look at them on original graphics, it's hard to believe that Halo 2 was an original Xbox game, because it almost looks the same as Halo 3, but with way less impressive lighting and maybe some lower res textures. But if you were to throw like Halo 3's lighting onto it, it would match up pretty well, which they did with the remaster, and the remaster looks fantastic and it plays just fine. But like Halo 3, they had the art style pretty much set down, so like not a whole lot changed. The Arbiter looks a little tiny bit different. The Marines are wearing different armor. Chief's armor is a little bit higher res and a little less scuffed up than it was in Halo 2. The music is fantastic, as it always is in every game, but that's never a point of contention. Like, Marty O'Donnell's music is fucking awesome. But like Halo 3 didn't have that huge leap from 2 to 3, which I guess is sort of how would they have. The leap is good enough. This beautiful game on a new system that they were able to do a lot more good stuff. It's almost like that leap went to Halo Reach, where like the art style changed again, the weapons are higher quality, textures are a lot nicer, the draw distances are longer, but it wasn't part of the mainline Halo series, so it's a little, not disappointing, because Halo 3 is not a disappointing game, but like, it's a shame that we didn't have another mainline Halo that looked as good as Reach.
Yeah, it's also a shame that we didn't have another mainline Halo that Bungie did. If you're looking at it from an objective perspective, Halo 4, it's a fine game. It does what it needs to do, and if it stands by itself, it's fine. It's fun. It has its moments. But if you're comparing it to this monstrosity of a reputation that Halo has given itself over time, it falls short. And if Halo 3 is a good summary of everything, in that series. But what I'm a little bit not worried about, but hopeful for, is that it seems like Halo Infinite has taken some visual cues from Halo 3, because, if you look at the gameplay trailer, you can see that it's not cartoony, but it's bright, it's well lit, and the enemies are all wearing like primary colors.
It's very stylized. Like there's a really strong stylistic choice. And it doesn't look realistic, but it looks consistent
With the series.
and it looks very easy to look at. It looks very fun to look at.
100% what I was trying to say. And what's great is that all the enemies are like primary colors. They're easy to discern from the background, and you can clearly tell what you're shooting at. I love it. So far, what I've seen is good, but it really seems to take visual cues from Halo 3, which I love.
And the armor design almost from Halo Reach, especially the multiplayer armors that they've shown off. They've got very Halo Reach style, which is good because the Halo Reach armor's style looked really nice. I just never liked how gritty they were. They were not as colorful as the previous games.
You like the designs, but you wish there had been more color palettes.
More color palettes and less scratched up, which I get like Chief has always been kind of scratched up, but I think Halo Infinite Chief is much slicker looking, and he's got that big blast mark along his chest, but he's not super scraped up and kind of grungy looking.
I will say that is one thing I liked, that they brought that over from Halo 3 to Halo 4. The armor damage was the same, but everything else looked stupid.
Everything else was so different, it was hard to tell it was the same damage.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, we updated your armor with nanobots. Like, fuck you. No, you didn't.
It's like, if you updated my armor with nanobots, why is it still damaged?
Exactly. Like, why didn't you add a rocket launcher? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? If you had the option to do it, then do it. Fucking hate that. I hate that explanation.
Also, I think it's a little disappointing we don't get to fight elites, and like story-wise it wouldn't have made sense to fight elites in Halo 3, but you have the brutes replace the elites, so it feels like you're fighting elites, but you're still just fighting brutes, so it almost feels like there's less variety in the bigger enemies, because with Halo 2 the brutes looked and acted distinct to the elites, but in Halo 3 fulfill the same role, so they don't do a lot of the stuff they did in Halo 2, which to a certain extent is good because they were ridiculous in Halo 2, but if you tone that down a bit, I think it would have been more fun. Now, chieftains are super good in 3. I like chieftains a lot.
Well, no, I got to disagree with you on that one, because if you've ever messed around with the brute AI, it's fucking useless. Someone did a video on it. I can't remember, but I tried it on my own, and my God, they're useless. They're so easy to stun. Once their armor is gone, it doesn't regenerate. They stand there and just shoot at you from a distance when their strength is close up. I'm not saying Halo 2 did it right because they were rushed, and it's like they're just basically bullet sponges in that game, but I feel like Halo 3 really missed an opportunity with the Brute's AI to do something really cool.
This brings me to something. The brutes basically were replacing the elites, and that's because in the other two games you still had the elites as enemies, and in fact they were a huge part of it. So when you suddenly take them away as an enemy, it's kind of hard to compensate for that. But one of my favorite things about 3, and what I will consider the greatest compliment about it, is that from a gameplay perspective, it's still great, even though there are technically fewer enemies. Going from 2 to 3, you lose the elites, the brutes are still there. I think the way they did it was they alternate between the Flood and the Covenant as enemies in a nice way. So you're never getting bored with fighting the same enemies over and over again, or at least not as much as you could.
Well, they do that in Halo 2 plenty as well. Like, you alternate between fighting the Covenant and the Flood, but then you also get introduced to the Brutes, and they act differently than the Covenant. So it's almost like, because the Brutes in Halo 3 took the role of the elites, it's almost like you don't have Brutes in Halo 3, or like the Brutes that they had introduced. They fill in an old role instead of their new role, so you're almost missing that kind of...
They could have even had two separate styles of brutes. You know how in 3 you don't see any honor guards for some reason. There were brute honor guards in Halo 2. What they could have done is had some of those where some brutes had shields and some of them just had their armor and their health, and some would play like elites and some would play like brute. They could have at least done that.
Yes and no. I would say, because brutes are, and I'm going to rattle off a little bit of canon here, and I know that's obnoxious because it's not the game, but they don't really fight their instincts. They're all really aggressive fighters, and they're all very focused on, I mean, if you just look at the weapons, they're all big chunks of metal designed to put as much hurt down range as possible, and have most of them have like huge swords attached to them. There's a reason they're called brutes. And I feel like you said, losing the elites as an enemy really took a lot of the play style that Halo 1 and Halo 2 had. If that elite gets behind cover, its energy shield's going to regenerate, and I'm going to have a much harder time. So I need to push and hit that thing before its shields regenerate, or else it's going to be way worse than it should be. In 3, the brutes, once the armor is broken, nothing happens. They just die. They don't have regenerating shields. It's just armor. So it's a pain in the butt because it makes it easy to just kind of barrel your way through a level. If a second level where the brutes invade Crow's Nest, if you're trying to fight a bunch of brutes, all you need to do is keep firing, because once their armor goes down, they stagger, and then you keep shooting them. And even if one of them goes into a rage mode, you just keep shooting it.
Yeah, and they don't even rage all that hard. Like in Halo 2, I think they raged a bit too much, but they would like cover the distance really crazy fast, so you would have to be prepared. Where in Halo 3, it wasn't as much of a threat, and almost was something you wanted them to do, because then they'd stop shooting at you because they just charge.
It's ridiculous, but it's not an overarching criticism of Halo 3 as a game. I think Halo 3 is great. It's a lot of fun, but it's also one of the reasons why I have a lot of mixed feelings about Halo 1 Anniversary, but I do think that it is a good opportunity for new players who don't want to play games that look so old to get into Halo.
I think in terms of maybe not even just looks, but the general gameplay, it feels the best. Because Halo 2 has got a lot of sort of linear areas where it doesn't really open up as much. And there are bits where it opens up and it looks really nice on the remaster and whatever, but Halo 3's got a lot more of physics objects and things that'll go around when you shoot a grenade or use the gravity hammer or whatever. And so it's a lot more fun to blow stuff up in Halo 3 and run into things where that wasn't really there in Halo 2 yet, because they had just introduced the physics engine with Halo 2.
Because they had a more powerful piece of hardware to work on, there was a lot more stuff going on in the background. Like we just played the final run, near the very end, there's this huge chunk of the Halo ring that falls through the floor and kills all those Flood that are running at you. And it looks amazing, but you wouldn't be able to get there to do anything about it. But at the same time, it's not happening in the background. It's right there. Like if you were over there, you would get hit by that thing. It's really, really well done. As Bungie's quote unquote last mainstay entry into the Halo line, besides obviously Reach, but I'm talking about the trilogy, I think they did an excellent job kind of wrapping it up.
Going back to the point of there not being elites in Halo 3, it's the timing of the elite splitting from the Covenant was sort of strange, because it happens at the end of the second game, and in the third game you're picking up, and then the elites are just, sure, they help you fight, but they're not really even in the game very much. So it would have been cool if they timed it where there were at least a couple of levels in 3 where you were still fighting the elites or trying to convince them to be on your side, yada yada, but the game was really short and there's no place for that either.
It does almost feel like they shot themselves in the foot. During the development of Halo 2, that was meant to be like the last Halo. They were not going to make another Halo game after Halo 2, but they ended up having to scrap the ending, and there was a terrible development cycle, and it ended on the cliffhanger, so they had to make another Halo, and it was like, whoops, we wrote the elites out at the end of the last game. Like, do we have them show up again and just kind of ignore that? Because it's not like the brutes just went after a couple of elites, like specifically. It was like all the elites are going to get killed by the brutes, so we can't put those back into Halo 3. Maybe they didn't have time to come up with like a new enemy type to fill in the role or something, or they just felt like they didn't want to come up with the lore for it.
When they make big story decisions like that, it's going to affect the gameplay.
I think with what they had, they did a great job. And I do like the fact that we're fighting alongside the elites. It's like a cool experience.
My big thing about Halo 3 is that there's clearly a lot of things they could have done better, but despite the obvious shortcomings, it's still a fun game to play. They did it with what little they had to work with.
Well, I think at this point they had quite a bit to work with, and it's not all that mind-blowing nowadays, but back in the day, this was a really big spectacle, especially for the 360. This was so early in the 360's life cycle. This was only 2 years after the console had come out. 1 year? 2 years. I think it was 1 year. Might have been. This is what got a lot of people to buy an Xbox, and Halo 3 was such a hit and so popular that movie theaters were reporting a loss of revenue that weekend after Halo came out because everybody was home playing Halo instead. And so this game was big. It got the credit it deserves. Everybody played it at the time.
I wasn't even really into video games very much at that time in my life because in 2007 I was 4 years old or whenever it was that it came out. But I remember a few years ago when I was 14 or so, I would watch videos of people playing Halo, and I don't really remember what it was, but Halo 3 stuck out to me as if I had to pick one Halo game to play, it would be that one. It had this appeal to it, and probably because there's also that it has a greater variety of weapons than the other games. It just, and they talk about this one time when I was doing multiplayer with the other guys, is that the weapons and the armor abilities and everything, Halo 3 is sort of brought all it together where they were going with that. We didn't really get to see it finished up until Halo 3. It's sort of them reaching the final step on that staircase there, you know?
Yeah, Halo 3 definitely feels the third game in the series, and I think Halo 3 ODST going off of that, which was the same engine and a lot of the same art style, and literally like the ODSTs were the same as they show up in Halo 3. It's a lot less of a special game because there's so much difference between 1, 2, and 3. 2 is a huge step up from 1, 3 is a whole console generation away from 2, and like Reach changed a lot of stuff, so it feels a lot different than 3, even if it might be kind of similar mechanically. ODST is the weakest of the series because it just sort of falls by the wayside. Oh yeah, it's Halo 3 ODST. This definitely just feels like I want to play Halo 3.
I personally really like ODST. I think it's, well, it doesn't necessarily feel like a Halo game. I don't know if it's supposed to, because you're not playing as the Master Chief. You're not playing as the
But that's the problem, I think, and I'll get into more of this when we do ODST on my real thoughts of that, but you are playing as the Master Chief, even if you're not, because mechanically the game plays exactly the same as Halo 3. They've just retuned the UI to be a little worse, and it is worse, because in Halo 3, your shields tell you, oh hey, my shields are going down, I can only get shot 1 or 2 more times, and I don't get to really know my health, but I know my shields are down, so I need to get my shields back up. Well, in ODST, it works the same way, except you don't get to see your shields, and they're called stamina. So you don't get to know when your stamina is all the way down besides an arbitrary red vignette. And then you just start losing health that'll just start beeping at you until you get your health bar back. And it's super annoying if you ever get to a point in a level where your health is down a little bit and there's no health bar around, or no health kits around, because you just go doot-eat, doot-eat, doot-eat. It's the same mechanics as Halo 3, but worse.
You're still one character facing off against an army of the Covenant. They couldn't really make you that much slower or weaker or anything than Master Chief because of that, even though ODSTs are supposed to be. And I feel like having a team mechanic would have been cool for that, but then it would be even less of a Halo game if they did that.
I also think Halo 3 starts the point where I think they started getting a little too worried about lore getting in the way of the game instead of the other way around. And this doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, but it's like, oh hey, yeah, for Halo 3, players 2, 3, and 4, it's like, okay, well 2 is the Arbiter because the Arbiter is there. Well, player 3 can't just be another Master Chief now, even though player 2 in Halo 1 and 2 were both Master Chief or 2 Arbiters. So they come up with 2 more characters where it's like, okay, well, we haven't put any lore in for human characters with shields. So instead of just creating a new human character with shields, we'll just throw in 2 elites. We'll write their lore in later. And then in ODST, it's like, okay, ODSTs don't have headlamps or shields. So we'll retune the mechanics to work the same, but they don't have shields, and you get visor instead, which is worse than a headlamp because it just highlights enemies for you. There's no reason not to use it all the time, so you end up getting in situations where it's so dark you need to use something to illuminate the area, and you just get all of the enemies highlighted for you, which makes it a little ridiculous because enemies are too hard to see. They just highlight them for you instead of improving visibility another way. Or it's so bright that you can't use visor, but it's still dark enough in the shadows that the enemy's visibility is still really bad.
I like the visor.
The thing about that, and as well as having the SMG and the Magnum be better weapons in ODST, they're basically having the rookie outshine the Master Chief in too many areas.
Also, the rookie doesn't ever speak, which is weird because the rest of the cast, which you get to play as during levels, does speak, and when you're playing them. So the whole thing about the rookie not speaking seems out of place.
I believe it was supposed to so you can project yourself onto them, but it doesn't fit in a Halo game, is the point.
Especially because there are points in the game where the rookie would have been able to respond to people had he been able to speak, that he just doesn't, and they just sort of gloss over it.
Right, when near the end, when you run into Dare and she has the engineer, I think they're called, and she's asking you several questions, and you're just standing there like, duh.
There's even a time where Dare's talking over the radio, and she's like, if anyone's out there, can they please respond? And the rookie's just like, nope.
Yeah, sorry, I made a vow of silence, so I will let people die needlessly because of that.
Getting back to Halo 3, I think the second half of the game with the Ark definitely feels like you're on a Halo ring, even though it's like a Halo installation. The Covenant was a super good callback to the Silent Cartographer, which is one of the best levels in all of Halo. The Covenant does a really good job of kind of modernizing it, doing it a little bit differently, but also very clearly like, hey, this is the Silent Cartographer. And then going back to places that you saw on the ring in Halo 1, because it's the same ring, was really cool. And especially getting through that one identical hallway in the mission Halo was super cool.
They definitely stuck to the Halo 1 formula, and they did a good job. I think everything that I've had a complaint about is really just a nitpick. Overall, Halo 3 is a really well-made, fun game that still holds up pretty well today, and you can have a rip-roaring great time with your friends.
And even if the problems with the game are not nitpicks, I think they are minor enough that they don't affect the overall experience of the game, because there's stuff like you were saying, the brute AI is not very good. Well, you don't notice that if you're just playing through the game normally, because you just play through the game normally, and you have a lot of fun fighting the stuff, and it feels fine. Like, if you were to sort of try and notice that stuff, I think you would be able to break it really easily, and you can do that with Halo 1 and 2 as well. But that's almost the advantage of the game, I think, for a lot of people who like to break the games mechanically, because there's a very consistent way that Halo is made that you can break things, where I think a lot of other games rely on, I think, a lot of different tricks where Halo can just throw stuff into a sandbox and make it. I mean, Halo has a bunch of tricks for it too, but like it feels more like it was a set of tools that they then made something out of, instead of using a set of tools to make something, if that makes sense. Don't know if that makes sense in my head.
With Halo 3, basically, if you want to find issues with it, you have to want to find them. You have to dedicate your time to investigating that instead of just enjoying playing the game.
Nothing in Halo 3 is like standout bad. Well, as in terms of levels. Like Cortana is not a great level, but it's cool, it's unique. You finally get Cortana back and you fight through a bunch of Flood.
And it's short.
It's not like Gravemind in Halo 2. That level is such a pain. It's not like any of the Arbiter levels in Halo 2, which can be kind of a pain, especially on harder difficulties with all the Flood. It's not like the library in Halo 1 or 2 Betrayals. None of these levels feel like, oh, I wouldn't ever want to play that again after having done it, where Halo 1 and Halo 2 definitely have levels like that.
The biggest issue, honestly, was the Gravemind, shaking the screen and slowing you down.
Oh my god. Yeah, we haven't even talked about that stuff. The whole getting slowed down by Cortana in the Gravemind is a fucking stupid decision.
Story is obviously important, but gameplay, it's a first-person shooter. Gameplay is going to be the most important, and if you stop the player from playing the game
To a screeching halt.
just to shove this growly monster in their face. Yeah, listen, I know you were trying not to die because of all these Flood around, but I want to growl in your face for an entire minute uninterrupted, so please deal with that.
There was really no reason to slow down the gameplay to such a degree. Like, you could have just been running through just fine and still hearing that.
It almost feels like it would have been like a last minute decision done. Like maybe somebody decided, oh hey, we'll do this, and then they didn't have enough time to like test it out, and they were like, fuck it, chip it with the game, it's fine. And I was saying there's nothing standout bad. That is the standout bad thing of Halo 3. That is very glaringly the worst part of Halo 3, and it's weird that that was even in the game, but it's such a minor thing most of the time that you can ignore it, I guess. Really makes itself known.
I feel like it's one of those tricks that they use to load parts of the level, but it's not.
Yeah, because there's mods that remove that. They remove the slowdown and stuff, and it doesn't affect the level at all. It's just sort of arbitrarily placed and really annoying.
I guess they wanted you to feel like the Gravemind is powerful, that he's able to slow you down so much and shake everything, but there's no point to that, because we've already seen him grab the Master Chief and the Arbiter, each in one of his many tentacles, and move them around with these. Like, he's a huge thing. It's already, based on what he is, obvious how powerful he is. So it's like they were trying to hammer it further into you. They're trying to spoon feed it to a little baby.
The heads-up display, I think removing health from Halo is a little bit of a weird decision in Halo 2, and they go through that with Halo 3, and you don't see health return for Spartans until Halo Reach. And there's also the visor lines in Halo 3, which aren't really that big of a deal, but it does a little bit obscure the screen. It's not as jarring as Halo 4 or Halo 5, but that was sort of the start of something bad, and then they did it a little bit worse in Halo ODST, where the color is a bit more opaque, and especially when it's dark, it's very apparent and sort of, it looks a little ugly. And so for Halo Reach, they changed it again and fixed up the UI, so it's a lot cleaner and it's a lot more obvious, I guess, without having a bunch of extra fluff onto it. And it's weird that like the little problems that Halo 3 had are fixed in Halo Reach, but I think Halo Reach is a worse experience for me personally because it's just not as fun and not as colorful.
I'm not sure if I'd agree, but it's definitely a fair point. Like, again, I really enjoy Reach, but
Yeah, and most people do. I have a way more negative opinion of Reach than a lot of people.
Do y'all know where the term threech came from? I don't know. I've heard people say that. What is the correlation between those two games?
I mean, mechanically, they're not all that different. I think the sandbox being different and the balancing being different is what kind of makes them feel way more unique. But in terms of actual level of gameplay, I don't think Reach really adds anything that we don't see in 3 besides the flying level when you're in space. That's basically the only new thing. Like you see on New Alexandria, there's like a lot bigger of a flying around section, which at the time was sort of a big accomplishment because it was like, look at how much we can load. Nowadays is very slowed down, I think, and kind of boring. But and there's like Spartan abilities, which I think change up a little bit of it, but that's, people have their opinions on that. And it changes up the way the game plays a little bit, but overall mechanically, Halo Reach is a lot like Halo 3, where Halo 1 and 2 play a lot differently, and then Halo 3 and 2 play a little bit differently.
I do like Reach, though, but I think I like Reach for an entirely different reason. I'm not sure what that reason is, though, but I do like Reach, but I don't like it in the same way I like 1, 2, and 3.
The battle rifle throughout 2 and 3 became a really iconic weapon, and I'm really not sure what the point of replacing it with the DMR was.
That was one of the problems I had with Halo Reach, is the over-reliance on precision weaponry in Reach and having the game balanced towards multiplayer. And like all the Halos have been balanced towards multiplayer, so the weapons in Halo have always been the same as they are in multiplayer, but I think in Reach, it's where it's really noticeably suffers, because a lot of weapons in the sandbox in Reach are built around fighting another Spartan in multiplayer and not fighting the enemies in single player, and so they feel a lot weaker. So it's like, oh, if you don't have a DMR in the campaign or a carbine, you are at a disadvantage. It's very clearly that. Or if you're not using a plasma pistol, where I think Halo 3 had a much stronger sandbox overall.
In Halo 2 and 3, they basically screwed the Magnum over because of how powerful it had been in Combat Evolved, and then Reach, because of the reliance on precision weapons, they introduced the Needler rifle to replace the carbine. It functions even more closely to the DMR than the carbine would have. And then they're making the Magnum a decent ranged option again, and what's up with that? Was 3 so wrong that you had to change all those things to make this game? Like, it doesn't even play all that differently from a campaign perspective, but definitely there's that multiplayer disconnect between them.
This will lean heavily into my opinion, but I think Halo Reach has a much less memorable campaign than Halo 3 for several reasons. One being the levels in Halo Reach, every single one is stitched together from multiplayer maps and firefight arenas. And so replaying it after playing it once and then playing playing through like the multiplayer and then replaying it again, it's like, well, these aren't anything different from what I'm doing the multiplayer on. And so it's like I'm just getting the same exact experience in these areas as I would be playing through it in multiplayer, especially if you're doing Firefight for multiplayer. And then the story goes, you lose Halo Reach, but because of the way they wrote it, I think a lot of what happens in Halo Reach is like, well, the Master Chief could have done that. Well, the Master Chief could have done that. We weren't able to do. So it's like, oh yeah, we're going to fight a scarab. Well, it's like, nope. You're not going to fight a scarab. The scarabs will show up in the level. You can even blow open the backs of them to get to the core, and you can blow up the core, but the scarabs don't actually die. For some reason, they weren't able to get the scarab AI over from 3, so there's no scarab boss fight in Reach. Or, we got to deliver a bomb to a space station, or a spaceship. Or Master Chief did that in Halo 2. George dies. It's like, okay, guess that's that. Or just like fighting off 2 elites. It's like, we do that all campaign, and Emil just gets snuck up on, even though he was already fighting and noticed the Phantom drop over him that he wasn't shooting at for some reason. And there's all kinds of little things, I think, and that just like Halo Reach's campaign feels a lot less exciting, and it's a lot less colorful. And I get they were going for that to make it a more serious thing, but Halo is a game where the first one in the series was like, oh yeah, you're a big cyborg man with a little blue lady that talks in your head, and you fight aliens whose voice lines are little ones that scream, and the big ones are a guy that speaks backwards. It's always been kind of a goofy series, so trying to make it into a more serious thing, I think, didn't work for me.
You brought up a really good point about the campaign and multiplayer differences. In 3, it's abundantly clear. You play them for entirely different reasons. In Reach, feels whether you're doing firefight, campaign, multiplayer, it still has that same general feel. There's nothing sticking out about why you'd want to do one over the other. And multiplayer in 2, I know almost nobody who says they actually like base 2's multiplayer at all. 3 was everything was great.
It may just be your like age group, but there was a pretty hardcore fan base for Halo 2's multiplayer that stuck around even after Halo 3 came out because of the changes Halo 3 made to the sandbox, the addition of equipment and stuff like that. It wasn't a huge major change, but like even just the addition of equipment, people were like, oh, Halo 3's multiplayer is so much worse with this equipment. We're going to just stick with Halo 2. There was a big group, and especially going from 3 to Reach, there was also a big group of people who were like, wow, these Spartan abilities are awful. We don't want these. We're going to stick with Halo 3. But I think, most people were fine with that enough to move on to the next one.
Like you said, it probably is the people from the age group that you're in, but I'm 31. I was huge into Halo 2 multiplayer. It was some of the best at the time. If going from Halo 1 multiplayer, which was somewhat basic, but it had all these vehicles, and Blood Gulch was incredible, Team Slayer was awesome. Just adding so many features from 1 to 2 was just awesome.
And online.
And online, exactly.
Halo 2 was the first one to have online, right? I mean, aside from the PC version of 1.
Halo 2 was the first one to have Xbox Live, so it was revolutionary. And my God, it's just, I can't even be objective when talking about Halo 2 because it was such a huge part of my childhood. You know what I mean? I'm trying to be objective here, but talking about Halo 1 and Halo 2, I can't be because it's such a huge nostalgia factor that it's impossible. I enjoyed them both, though. I really did. I think that Halo 1, Halo 2, and Halo 3 all had exceptional multiplayer.
And they're all so unique from each other, every Halo game, except for ODST, I think, is a lot like Halo 3, but every Halo game is so different that works to their strengths and weaknesses. It makes their strengths more apparent, and it makes their weaknesses more apparent.
Right.
I agree, and I also think that's one of the great reasons that the Master Chief Collection came out on PC, because you can play any one of them. So if you don't like the weakness of one of them, go find one of them that has that weakness made into a strength. But all in all, the Halo 3 is excellent.
A lot of fun. And it doesn't take too long either. Like, we beat it in a little over 4 hours. Now, we also did it on Heroic with 4 people. When I played Halo 2, I did it with Legendary with Sono, and that took 15 hours, and I never, ever want to do that again. I will get into that when I do.
We were playing the Halo 3 co-op with Heaven, who likes to ignore things and just run.
Yeah.
Heaven, if you're listening to this, go F yourself. I hate how you play Halo 3.
I also think Halo 1, the campaign was built in 6 or 7 weeks. Halo 2, that was built in 10 months, but they had to scrap a bunch of stuff and they didn't have time to test things, so like brutes were kind of thrown in last minute, stuff like that.
Why do they not release the thing that they did for E3? I want to play through that.
Because it's not playable, basically. It's 343 did a video on it, and it's like 99% scripted.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's crazy that the things they had to script for that. I was like, well, they didn't have boarding done. So boarding is a scripted sequence where you just go into the area and it automatically attaches you to the ghost and you get on. Dual wielding was not done yet, so that was a scripted thing where the SMGs were actually just one weapon, and when you fired, it fired both at the same time. Or like all kinds of weird little things like that.
That's disappointing.
Heaven couldn't be here, unfortunately, for the real thoughts, but his opinion is he enjoys Halo 2 more than Halo 3. It's hard to say, because I think Halo 3 overall is better than Halo 2, but Halo 2 is my favorite because, I don't know, I guess just, I've talked about this before. I was 4 when Halo 1 came out, so I couldn't really appreciate it. I was 7 when Halo 2 came out, so it was a little more around the time where I could make objective opinions, I guess. I was still really young. I had noticed between Halo 2 and 3 that Halo 2 and 3 didn't change all that drastically, and Halo 3's story wasn't as cool as Halo 2. And so Halo 2 had all that stuff, like introducing so many new things, mechanics, enemies, story, art style, that Halo 3 kept and continued with, but Halo 3 didn't have as much of an impact on Halo itself. Where like Halo 3 sold a whole lot better than Halo 2 because Halo 2 was like, people loved Halo 2 so much they were lining up for miles to get to Halo 3, and like Halo 3 was definitely the peak of the Halo series in terms of like sales and I think people playing and whatever, but Halo 2 was the peak for what defines Halo, and I think that's what makes it my favorite. The boss fights in Halo 2 are not good. The level design is a bit tedious. The ending is not good. The whole fact that they had to cut the ending and put it on a cliffhanger, like back in the day, that made me angry when I was a kid. It was like, that's it? That's where we end? Like, I gotta wait 2 or 3 more years for another one after this? Like, that's not fair. Halo 2's got a lot of weaknesses, but I think Halo 3 is more fun to play overall, but Halo 2 is my favorite. I also think that's why I don't like Halo Reach that much, because I don't think there's anything in Halo Reach that makes me go, yeah, I'm glad they changed this from Halo 3, or they do it a lot better than Halo 3. I don't think there's anything in it that sticks out as better.
The graphics. That's it.
That's it. Yeah, the graphics. But even then, they changed the art style and it's a lot duller looking. So it's like, I can't even go, the graphics are so much better. They look crisper, they're higher quality. The character models, the animations are better, but they changed the art style and it's not as bright. And so I think I don't like that.
I absolutely love every aspect of the UNSC space combat. It level in Reach, where you got to pilot those ships and fly around that frigate. I want to see more. I want to have a game that's focused on the space combat, even if it's like Empire at War style RTS. I love that shit.
A Halo like spin-off with like dogfighting would be kind of fun, like the Star Wars game that just came out, Rogue Squadron.
Yeah, Rogue Squadron. Yeah, that would be kind of
to do things like, oh yeah, you get to pick from like whatever the space thing you're flying in Halo Reach, or a long sword or something, or like a space pelican or something like that, and like more focused on that kind of combat to like flesh that out and make it more interesting, because I think it's not all that great in Halo Reach. It mostly just plays like flying a Hornet in Halo 3, but you only go straight.
Oh, yeah. The Hornets. The Hornets were really fun for me to mess around with, and you get to hop in. There's one Hornet segment, and then there's another level where you can get into a Hornet for a short time, but it's not really as much of a thing. I think for how well they implemented it, it was criminally underused.
Yeah, it was sort of the like UNSC version of a Banshee, and you don't really get to use. I think you can like steal a Banshee in a couple of levels, but you don't really get to use a Banshee in Halo 3's campaign.
Oh, right. In Halo 2, they made the vehicles incredibly important, and if 3 lost a little of that, just a little.
I don't know. I think vehicles are still pretty important in Halo 3, because if you go through any of the levels without a vehicle, when the levels are built around that, it's very clear that they were built around using a vehicle, and the lack of like a sprint mechanic makes it feel like such a drag to walk through the levels.
And we experienced that, and we were just playing through it, and our vehicles got blown up, and it was... Oh.
Halo 3 is definitely built more around vehicles and the fact that there's no sprint. I think the fact that there's no sprint works to its advantage almost, that you want to be using a vehicle, where I think if you were sprinting, the vehicles would have to be a lot faster and the levels would be a lot larger, so then it would sort of negate sprint in general. But we'll see how that works in Halo Infinite, because it's sort of open worldy. If you have a strong enough multiplayer game, if somebody tries to break the formula in it and they just can, I think that makes it a weak experience. There's stuff like Rainbow Six Siege. Before people knew how to play that, they just sort of played it like Call of Duty, but then once it sort of cemented on the best ways to play, it was a lot harder to cheese the mechanics of that game because of how well playing it the way it was intended worked and how much more dominance that was. So when you get a multiplayer game where you can cheese the mechanics and it just works, it's a lot of weaker of an experience versus trying to break the mechanics and failing because the core mechanics are so strong. Halo 4's got a whole plethora of different issues and why you just have like one person who will dominate the battlefield, where Halo 3 is much more designed around equal starts and fighting over the power weapons and vehicles. Even Halo Reach had a problem with that, where with the loadouts you could choose and stuff like sprinting causing double melee issues and stuff like that, there was a lot of balancing issues with Reach.
3 was when they figured everything out and gotten it to that balance. And after that, with Reach and 4 and all that, they started adding in more stuff that really didn't need to be there and didn't add much. Like, it added a flavor to the gameplay, but it took away what was important about the strong gameplay in the 3 multiplayer.
Yeah, I think we've like talked Halo 3 to death now.